This is Zettelcast, brought to you by readers, writers, thinkers, and teachers from Lillipub, along with our partners in thought, our Zettelkastens. In this show, we share discoveries that our Zettelkastens have shown us.
There you go.
And compare notes on how we're using this marvelous invention in our creative work. Thank you for joining us.
All right, Book.
Let's do it again.
All right.
Episode 14, Indexes and Other Gifts.
Welcome to the Zettelcast, where the four of us this time, because Deb couldn't make it, she's feeling under the weather, but the four of us and our plus ones, our Zettelkastens, are here to have a nice conversation. So to start things off, let's talk about indexing. So the questions are, what's your process for indexing, and has it changed, and has it evolved, and what do you do when you can't find something? And anything else that you want to say about indexing. So who would like to start us off?
I could start.
Okay.
I'm going to want to share my down facing. So if you can, have you already made it so that we can share? Nope.
It's the wrong thing. Okay.
All righty. So. So this is part of my index. I just wanted to put it in a separate little box and have enough of a V so that you could see what's here. So I've got, I made some notes. So with the way I started, I'm just going to look at the D's. So the way I started was with topic names. Topic names. And there were lots and lots of these. And what I did at the very beginning, from the very first day, it was topic names augmented by, where did I put it? Dates. So this is the Z log. And every date that I installed stuff into my Zettelkasten, I wrote down, what did I put in so that, and I've got like 5 of these, so that, answers your question, what do I do if I can't find something in the index? I do, well, about when do I think that was? And that supplements these lousy index entries, which don't summon up a full thought. And now this thing right here, footprints in dreams. Footprints in dreams, and it's like it's all over my Zettelkasten from a date in May. It's a single card that I created that connects a whole lot of threads in my life. And there are so many threads that it connects that it ought to be about 10 cards. But it was a single card with all sorts of concepts on it. But at least I did it, and I have a tagline, Footprints in Dreams. And so when I read Footprints in Dreams, what I know experientially is, well, that's that card where I really kind of got naked with Nadia. It's very personal, and yet has lots of threads that go outward. And then looking forward to so I've introduced taglines, and then I did what Kathleen recommends, which is promoting certain, so this is a D, so I'm going to put it back in the Ds, promoting certain cards as their own card when they've had 3 or more with that keyword. And then, because I started doing a lot of that, sorry if I'm going on too long, I started doing a lot of that, I found it really useful to have tabs for those. I'm all about the tabs, and you can see, if you were to read my index now, you might think, well, I'm going to start with those tabbed things because that's the stuff that is more represented. It's like a histogram. Very cool, love it. And then looking back at that card, that Footprints and Dream card, literally there were 24 different things connected to it in some way. To recognize in creating a tagline, if you can't create a tagline that hits all the concepts that you've got in that card needs to be split. And I think of it as story splitting. In agile development, what you do is you create what's called a user story. You say, as an author, I want a way to save my research so that I can pull tidbits of my research that pertain to the work that I'm writing, right? That would be a user story. And you could probably create a summary title of that thing. And if your user story is much more complicated, has many more moving parts to it, what you've got is called an epic. You need to break that down into user stories. And so in agile development, and I have worked as an agile coach, that's one of the first things that we learn how to help people do is find where are the split points of your epic so that each of your ideas is its own little thing that you can allow to blossom on its own. So that's how Nadia Z has evolved.
That is cool. That is so cool. I'm so glad that you shared that piece because I always wondered how the additional tabs functioned, if those were things that you knew that you would be reading or exploring, or if those evolved out of the box. So that makes total sense.
Yeah, I started out anticipating on that same, fateful day when I was indexing Footprints and Dreams. On that fateful day, I started anticipating what are the things that I think are going to develop into their own cards. And then I thought, no, let's just let them evolve. When they show up is when they show up. And so I went back very quickly to Kathleen's recommendations, like, look for two of them. If you found two of them and you're about to add a third, you're going to add one of those cards. It works great, and things ripen.
Oh yeah. Very cool.
Awesome. Thank you, Julianne.
I'm high on my index. Love it. I want to hug it.
Right. Well, I can go next since I'm the non-traditionalist of the indexers. When I started my note box, my first principle, which many know, was I knew immediately that this was not going to be a tool for nonfiction at that time. At the time, I was writing a novel, and so I knew it was going to need to contain this largely made-up universe that was hung onto a framework of an existing reality. So when I went through Scott's system and looked at how to set it all up, the index, bib box, main box concept took me a while to wrap my head around. I kept getting my index cards and my main cards confused. And I started thinking very, very early on, like from the very first cards, I started thinking all of these carded receptacles are not going to work for me. Having 3 of them, it's too hard for my brain to partition that off because so much of what I was indexing didn't have bib cards because it was made up. So I had to figure out, how am I going to capture these things and be somewhat true to the system, suspecting down the road I would be using it for nonfiction, which it certainly evolved that way. So the first thing that I did was I sat down with just a piece of paper and made columns that represented the academic disciplines. And so my first 5 buckets are the 5 ones that Scott gives you. And then 6 and 7 were kind of the wild card at that point. Almost immediately, I knew that the 7,000s would be where my novel material would live, but I still didn't really know what that was going to look like. So I tried my hand at using a card index for about 1 day, and that's being generous. Because I knew immediately I was going to get lost in looking through all these cards for stuff that I had made up. I'm like, this is not going to work because it didn't fit the system. So I was like, okay, scrap that. So I defaulted to my favorite happy place, which is a happy planner. And my second most favorite happy things, which are tabbed indexes. And these are just tabbed A through Z. And I thought, okay, using my little schematic of where things go, I'm just going to go through my alphabetized tabs, and I'm just going to start recording in a list fashion, in no particular order, things that I know I'm going to need to get back to. So like, for example, I'm looking at A. The first entry is the Awkward Squad. That's a group of men who train themselves to go off to World War I. Asymmetrical warfare. That's something that my main male character knows very well, etc. and so on, all the way down through Aristotle, asemic writing, Asaph the Physic from the Bible. There's a million of them. So once I made out that list, I thought, this makes sense to me. Because for my story world, when I go to look for something, I need to see as much of that story world index real estate as possible so that I'm seeing it all in relation to each other, which functions in the same way as, say, going to your main box and thumbing through cards and making those connections. I needed to see as much as I could on one page for that process to work for me for fiction. So that's how my index evolved, is now I've gone, now every tab has 2. So there's 2 A's, 2 B's, because it's expanding out. And I also go over on to the back, like my C is crazy. So I want to show you that one because you will notice, in the same way that Julianne described cards getting separated out, like as you might call a collection or a directory, I did that. But rather than adding that card with a tab, I just put all of those terms onto a single card and punch them, and they just get slotted into the happy planner. And so they live under that letter, but they're just in the planner under that letter. So I use the system the same way, it just looks differently. So the second thing that I did, which delineates in my mind what is where, is on C, if you can see, on the left side of the page are what I would call nonfiction terms. This is more like your traditional Scott Scheper reading capturing of information. Over here under C, these are character names, these are character places, C words that are specific to my story. So in that way, with that division on the page, if I'm looking for a concept, a book, what have you, it's in more the proper left aligned margin side. If I'm looking for something specific to the story, which is most often character bound, those are returned down half the page on the right hand side, against the right margin. So visually, again, I can always see this is real life, these are reality, this is research, and these are where my characters and story specific stuff lives. So that was how I had to kind of massage my index into something that would serve me in the way that I needed to for the writing. And then I was a little worried. I thought, well, when I start installing nonfiction stuff, is that going to work? And it absolutely did. I just divided the page in half and kept the world separate. So that's how mine evolved and works ridiculously well for me. Sometimes if I'm stuck, I just go look at an index page for that character and I just look around and remember, ooh, I could add this over there. And it just kind of sends you down that road because it's all right there on the page.
Whew.
Wonderful.
One of the things that
Wilma.
reminds me of is your division of the page into
Mm-hmm.
different zones.
Mm-hmm.
It's a drinking game. Julianne's going to bring up Anthony Metivier. Anthony Metivier talks about ways that certain paper artifacts act like a memory palace, in that you have spatial memory of that thing. And so you have the spatial memory that you now know, if I'm looking for stuff in my story, it's on the right hand side. And yeah, and just dividing the space in a way that is very orienting and easy to recall.
Yeah, that is a critical part of all of my process. It's part of how I live my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that fully. Like, I didn't have that gravitas of an aha moment until I set up the standing desk to write my Zettelkasten for Fiction Writers book. When I set up that desk over there and populated it with only the things I need for that book, nothing else gets to go over there. As soon as I go over there, I know this is chapter 1 through 10. This is chapter 11 through 22. This is the note box that I'm working out of. This is where the note box lives that has everything I've used. Everything has its place. So when I step into that space, it literally is like looking around the inside of my brain. Because for me, a huge part of my resistance was having to sit down and find things, or having to sit down and situate the things that I was going to use. I could waste an entire afternoon just setting up my workspace. I'm like, this is not going to work. I don't have time to waste. So it's like, it has to have a dedicated space. And once I did that, no lie, my productivity doubled, because it took all of that dithering and puttering away. And now my brain immediately knows where everything is. It's left the way that I leave it, and I go right back into the flow. So for me, that was a critical piece of getting the work done. It really made a difference. And I credit the Memory Palace, because I'd never thought of it like that before, but man, did it work.
Like, you cross the threshold and you're in the office of that book.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if I could just keep the novel from distracting me, it doesn't care where I am. Seriously, I'm sitting on the couch last night having tea, waiting for dinner to finish, and I'm supposed to be reviewing my notes from the day for writing the book. And what do I have show up but a whole new chapter idea for the novel? I'm like, no! I love it. But I wrote it down. It's safekeeping, but I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. It just dogs you.
Yes.
But it's a good scene.
Well, I've really learned a lot from both of you. Julianne, I am definitely going to start tabbing my cards. I love that idea of the word cards. And Victoria, I think I'm going to start a notebook index for my fiction world and keep the fiction world indexing out of my real world index completely. And I like the idea of using your notebook style for that, because I can put it to the front of my already existing notebook for my story. So it can live
Sure.
right in that world. And if I write a story in a different world, it can have its own world index.
Yeah.
Other than
Yeah, absolutely. Because that becomes your story Bible. It's job done, and you don't have to go back and recreate it. You're absolutely right.
And if I were to write a sequel to a story I've already written, it pops out and goes into the next book. And as it grows, maybe it becomes its own separate book if the sequel were to become a series. I just like that idea a lot. It's been bothering me having the fictional characters in my regular index. So I really appreciate that. Well, my index, I made every mistake in the book.
Thank you.
Creating an index. And the first thing that I began to do, and I'm going to pull a card, might as well use the letter D since Julianne set the pattern. Here's my index.
It scares me.
And D isn't the best one for showing it, but see those purple angle brackets? All of those are categories. And my categories got full names, but they were titles. Like I've got Design Philosophy for Language course. Not a bad title. Concept documentation. Um, each one of these things was just a title for a category system. And everything I did early on was based on categories. I was frightened of numbering the cards. So I created a system that I called clumps and dividers. And I just set up the dividers. I used my effortless numbering system to give numbers to the dividers, but I did not give numbers to the individual cards. They had every card in that clump had the same number as the divider number. And then everything went into a clump based on whether it fit the category. So it's, oh, this goes in this category, plunk. This goes in this category, plunk. And when the categories got too fat, then I divvied them up and said, what are the subcategories going on here? And I would break it up into maybe 3 or 4 subcategories, and I'd use a different color divider to separate it. Now I'm in a clump. Well, the problem with that process is I'm never thinking about relationships between the cards. I'm only thinking about membership in a clump. And that's a very static procedure. It doesn't really lead to anything. So it wasn't until I started putting a full tagline with each card that summarized the whole card and brought the whole card back to memory and began indexing every keyword in that tagline, then I suddenly had an index that really worked for me. Well, the tragedy was that while I was working from the clump and the card itself did not have a separate card number, all I had was the names of clumps. And I had no idea and no index and no path into whatever richness was contained within that clump.
Oh.
So that was a really, really, really bad mistake. So now I'm gradually, if I find myself looking for something that I cannot find the relating card, and I kind of feel that it's there, then I put my clump hat on. And I think, okay, what clump would I have put that into? And I look it up by the clump. And then I go to the clump and pull out the clump and file through it, and I find my right card. Well, then that clump has to be cleaned up. Now, long ago, when I first switched to numbering every card, I began, every time I touched a clump, I gave every card in the clump a number, but I did not index them. So now when I find a card that's in a clump, the whole clump gets indexed. And I convert the divider card that was just a title, that becomes a foundation card, and it becomes a real main foundation card, and it gets indexed as well. So gradually I'm working through some of that material that got lost. And I'm kind of being astounded at what I'm finding in it. So it's been a lot of fun. That's my index journey.
You kind of accidentally created for yourself time capsules, because since they weren't indexed, they got left alone for a long time, and now you're slowly rediscovering them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
and Julianne,
awesome.
I love your Z file as well. And I've been debating doing something like that for a long time. And you've done it, and you've proved that it's doable. It's not an insane amount of additional work. So I think I would like to do that. And I think I would like to give each new card that I add, an ID number. And so that we'll also have like um, as you would put in a SQL file, a unique identifier.
How is that different from the address? That's where
Well,
my
because
puzzled face.
the address, the card gets filed by address with its association. and it
Uh-huh.
also contains some kind of an ID number. Maybe it's just the date. Maybe I don't need a separate ID number, but something that would also tie it into time. Because
Okay.
I really enjoy when I run into one of my personal reflection cards because they all have the date, but none of my other cards have the date. And I think that's sometimes pretty valuable.
Yeah. Okay. So you're thinking of just doing so kind of an effortless numbering of the current date when you create a new card.
Yeah. And maybe just the
And
date.
then index that in a log or something. Yeah.
Yeah. To keep in a log like your Z log so that
Yeah.
as you
Could
mentioned,
work. Yeah.
if you can't
Better than
find,
what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah, for exactly the same reason why you mentioned it.
Well,
Great ideas. I'm
Cool.
learning.
yeah. Yeah, this is turning into a really fruitful conversation.
Thought it might.
Um,
Good.
so I got started with keywords, as Scott pretty much teaches us, Scott Scheper. And I used to give the advice to people who were freaking out about indexing to, not worry about it. And, just write down a few keywords. But if later you can't find a card, you should, once you find it, index every keyword that you tried to find it under and couldn't. Okay, that was my advice.
Nice.
And I think that's good advice for keywords. But the and I'll tell you where I got that advice in a minute. But the problem here is context dependent memory. Like, you know, it's been shown that like the flavor of gum that you chew while you're studying, if you chew that same flavor of gum at the test, you'll do better than if you don't. Just because it helps recreate the environment that you had while you were studying. And so the problem with keywords is when you're making a new card that's not immediately obvious how it connects to the keywords, you won't even think of them. Um, so that is
Right.
why I started not too long ago, I don't know, 3, 4 months ago, trying out the tagline system of Kathleen. And the tagline
Huh?
system is amazing because it is coherent and it brings the whole card back, and then you're filing it in multiple places, and that allows for when you're searching for something similar, these things pop up that you never would have made a connection to before with just keywords.
Yeah.
um, but the keyword thing, before I discovered Zettelkasten, I had run across this really weird little book that was self-published. It was called How to Make a Map of Every Thought That You Think by a guy named Lion Kimbrough. And, it's available on the internet if you search for his name. But he had almost all of the elements of a Zettelkasten um, that he had sort of worked out on his own. It was in a binder, though. It wasn't on cards, and that was part of the problem. And it also was more topic based. It didn't connect as easily as the Zettelkasten cards do. But that was his advice. Don't try to think of
Mhm.
every index term that you need ahead of time, because you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll fill up the index with things that you don't actually need. Um, so I need to reread that book, because while it was a complete failure for me as far as actually capturing things, it sort of set the stage. So once I did discover the Zettelcast, and I'm like, oh, I already know a lot of this stuff. It just wasn't in the right configuration. Um, and I think this guy would love the Zettelcast, and I don't know if he's ever run across it or not. But because the last thing I read by him, he had changed his system and was sort of like notebook based. But like, I think he would love the analog Zettelkasten if he ever discovered it or tried it. Um, but
Yeah.
anyway,
You should
uh,
send it to him, author to
well, I
author.
have I have no idea how to contact him. It might be possible to find that on the internet,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Please post a reference in LilyPub to the book.
I
Yeah.
will. I mean, it's a very strange read. It's like completely stream of consciousness and no editing, but there's parts of it that are really really interesting. So yeah, it's
Mm.
worth a look to get some ideas from. Um, so yeah, so now Yes, what do I do when I can't find something? Um, that's where we get into the memory dependent context dependent memory, because a lot of times I don't remember that I even had a thing. So I don't even know that it's missing. Um, if I happen to remember that there is a card that exists, then my Zettelkasten is still small enough, fortunately, that I can find it just by rifling through, and I get a rough idea of where it might be. But yeah, without the taglines, things get lost and I can't find them again. So for our second topic to discuss, yeah, we got some time still. Um, so in the spirit of the Christmas season, the question is, what is the greatest gift that you have gotten from your Zettelkasten? Or alternatively, has the Zettelkasten helped you give any gifts to others? So who would like to start?
Well, I'm willing to start because for the past year and a half, um, it's going on 2 years, very close to 2 years now. I've been living a gift and trying to also give a gift that came completely out of my Zettelkasten, and that is the gift that the Zettelkasten gave me was the awareness that that the catalog of virtues created by St. Thomas Aquinas, which where he dealt with the four cardinal virtues and then broke it down into 28 daughter virtues, that if you took the from zero to positive, which is what you have for virtues, and you extended the line in the other direction from to anti-virtues, you would have a complete character trait that could be used for fiction. And the Zettelkasten gave me that connection. And so I've spent 2/3 of a year teaching it in my Reawaken the Dream of Writing course. I created a book called Writing with Emotion that teaches how to do that. And it's been a central part of my life ever since. So my life from that time going forward is mapping out in a totally different direction than it ever would have without the Zettelkasten. So how about total change in direction for my life?
Only everything.
Yeah. Yeah. At risk of going same. Yeah, same. When I back in 2020-ish, when I started having inkling thoughts about the book that I started in 1998, that I got 25,000 words in and couldn't finish it, and then life got in the way. It was always back there. I always knew in my heart all I ever wanted to do was to be an author, but I couldn't get there. Just there was too much. I couldn't get there. Not that I didn't write a lot, but I was never able to finish that novel. And after going down the YouTube rabbit hole of Scott Scheper and binge watching all of his videos for a weekend, in a way that I don't know that I can necessarily put into words for someone that hasn't experienced it, I know this group is privy, something in me shifted in such a tangible way that I understood on a deep level that this would change everything. This would give me the tools that I was never able to find in a simple, straightforward way that could provide a path for me. And so the first thing that it did was I finished my novel. And through that process, very much in the way that Kathleen described, I consider this group true friends. I mean, I have found a true group of friends that I would drop anything to help. I would do anything for this group because you mean that much to me, because you literally changed my life. It was going this way in satellite land. I was miserable. I was burnt out. I knew where I wanted to get to, but again, I couldn't see the path. And a simple box of note cards, as ridiculous as it sounds, helped me make that transformation. and then having Kathleen's friendship and the shared vision of what Lily Pub could be and what we could share with other people gave me that larger mission that I always knew I was built for. I just didn't know what that would look like. It just really distilled everything into kind of one straightforward path with the mission and the vision at the end and the Zettelkasten path to get there. And it literally changed everything. So it put in my hands the tools that I needed to build the life I knew I was meant for. I just didn't know how to get there. And the Zettelkasten did that.
So I was sharing with Kathleen when we first joined that Nadia Z and I are having a honeymoon right now. we kind of, you know, when I created that Footprints in Dreams card, that's when the, you know, the crush started to develop. And now I'm trusting the soup. The process of creating the cards, making sure they hit all 4 of the buttons that Kathleen says, you know, it's not a full main card if it doesn't have these things. If it doesn't have the idea, your reaction to the idea, where'd you get that idea, and the tagline. If it doesn't have those, it's not done yet. So that discipline has been really good to make sure that I don't just kind of gloss over my own thoughts and ideas and observations. So there's that. And then the act of indexing, I feel like I'm grateful that it takes longer with the cards. I appreciate that tempo. And I appreciate it because it's working for me. It's like I'll spend an evening using as much of my brain as I can indexing and dealing with suddenly overflow of ideas. Crikey. and they start exploding, and I end up through the process of indexing. I've got 10 more cards I got to do something with tomorrow. But the thing is, I don't need to worry about it. I don't feel overwhelmed by it. Nadia's got me.
Yeah.
It feels, and it just keeps she keeps just giving me more. The more I give her, the more she gives me. I feel as though it could get manic feeling if I didn't have the grounding of Nadia Z to remind me when there's a clump of 20 cards there, that's 20 cards that could absolutely explode into 100 ideas. You better get on them. It's a physical reminder to be orderly.
Totally. I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm, you know, with the Roanoke story over the last couple of days, I've got so much to share. It's like the world is absolutely exploding, and it's coherent to me. So
Yeah.
it's such a surprise. I never wrote fiction in my life, and now I can't stop.
That's awesome. Well, that's the power of it. That's the true power of it, because that's what I experienced it. You're experiencing exactly what I did, which is, wow. I don't have to worry. I don't have to stress. I just have to be present and trust the process.
Yeah.
And it's so flippin' fun. I'm like, give me another hour. Just give me a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like everybody else, the greatest gift that the Zettelkasten has given me is a direction and the ability to store my ideas safely so they don't get lost, at least not lost permanently, even if they might sometimes get lost in the index, and a way to make connections. And it's just amazing to me. As soon as you start you find one connection, and then like like Julianne was saying, it explodes. It really explodes. And I've had the idea for years that I wanted to write something, you know, really exploring some idea, writing it on a regular basis. And I sort of made some stabs at it a little bit here and there, but without the Zettelkasten, I don't know how I would sustain such a thing. Um,
Yeah.
and writing my newsletter over the last 6 months since I launched and using the Zettelkasten to collect the ideas and to find the connections, those two things together um, have just produced so much, so much progress. Like the guy that I'm writing about, Ramon Lowell, I discovered his ideas, I don't even know, 10, 15 years ago, and sort of looked at him and said, "This is so complicated. I think there's something here, but I have no idea what it is." And I still didn't really know what it was when I started this newsletter series, but actually trying to figure it out and write about it, I'm starting to get it, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Funny how that works.
Yes, yeah, you put the work in and you get the rewards. If you put the work in with a good system to collect the work, because you can waste a lot of time with a bad system.
And you've got such a great burning question. What's this guy talking about?
Yeah.
There were too
Yes.
many people that he influenced not to just give it some faith that what he's saying mattered to a lot of people. And some of those people matter to me. So I'm going to go into it. I just love it. I love, Mel, how your original idea for your newsletter is absolutely an echo of this big idea. It's like a metaphor of the big idea that your newsletter is. And I don't know whether using the Zettelkasten actually helped you arrive there, but I could imagine that it's very helpful once you see, the bigness of your idea is very big. Easy to get overwhelmed.
Yes.
What excites me in your newsletter and why I get so excited when it arrives every month is that you get the feeling that there are people who spent decades of their lives devoted to writing about his system, and you get the feeling they understood it. And that means that it's possible to understand. So I'm really glad you're on the mission.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, you guys are going to be excited to know that I discovered a connection to Zettelkasten. Not a historical connection necessarily, but a conceptual connection.
I
So
love
we're going to be talking about that this week or this month.
Oh, boy.
Cool.
Yes.
Talk about gifts. That's a gift, your newsletter, definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So we have a little bit of time, so we can do our bonus like quick fire sort of question, which was, do we all have the first card that Scott Scheper provides, which was a quote from Lumen? And if you have that card, is it still an orphan? Is it still sitting there by itself in your Zettelkasten, or has a conversation grown up around it? And if you don't have that card, whatever your first card is, does it have a conversation?
Well, the Lumen card for me was the third card I added to my Zettelkasten. The first card I added to my Zettelkasten came from when my brother pointed me to the German Zettelkasten Wikipedia page, and I got my attention caught early on with a mention of Claude Shannon. I am Kathleen Shannon Spracklin, and when I was in junior high school, my brother and I were at the public library studying, which we often like to do. And my brother came rushing over to me and said very excitedly, "Look, Dad's picture's in a book." And I went over, and it was a Time Life book on computers. And this was in the early 1960s. And he opened it up, and there was one of those 8.5 by 11 books and a full full page picture, I looked at it and I said, "That's Dad." What? And then I looked at it again and no, that's not Dad. But the fact of the matter is, we couldn't say he could have been my father's identical twin because my father is an identical twin. But Claude Shannon looks more like my father than his own identical twin brother.
Ooh, separated at birth.
Yeah, if you put the three pictures together, you'd say which two are the identical twins. You'd grab him and my father. And then with the fact that I there's got to be some kind of genetic relationship there somewhere, but I have no idea, anything about it. But so of course that caught my attention when I saw Claude Shannon's name early, when the first pages that I explored in that the Zettelkasten. So I made a card for it, and that was my first card. My area of fascination was linguistics, and I was studying a book on forming how do you do an intelligent language course. And so my second card was on that language course. And the Lumen card was the third card I added to my Zettelkasten, and it connected the two. So it immediately became a three-card conversation from my first three cards. Spoiled me rotten.
Wow.
Wow. So I have that card, and it doesn't have as big of a conversation going as I would like, but one of the interesting things that does participate in the conversation. So for people who don't know what this card is, what this quote is, it's one of the most basic presuppositions of communication is that the partners can mutually surprise each other. Only in this way can information be produced in the respective other. Information is an intrasystematic event. It results when one compares one message or entry with regard to other possibilities. Information, accordingly, originates only in systems which possess a comparative scheme, even if this only amounts to this or something else. All right, that is a head full. But what I noticed for this exercise is that I hadn't created a tagline for it. So now I have created a tagline for one of the concepts in there, which is communication presupposes a capacity for mutual surprise. Now, the first link that I created to it, which was right around that time when Nadia Z and I were crushing on each other in May, is about Kraft's last tape. Are you familiar with this play? All right. I'm not doing this justice because I'm zoning out on the name of the playwright. He's the same playwright who wrote Waiting for Godot.
Oh.
You know who I mean?
Mhm.
Irish, France. Kraft's last tape. So in Kraft's last tape, the main character communicates with his past self via a library of recordings of his own voice. So you see him in this shabby room. You can see it on YouTube, and it's really amazing. The drama and humor that emerge from this communication depict what it is to communicate with oneself via a Zettelkasten. It's the same thing. The device of audio theatrically enables the nature of this communication to be transmitted to people at scale through drama. But Wikipedia lists the cast of characters portrayed in the play, which are all the people he's talking about, and part of it's his past self, right? We could think of or recognize this as an enactment of one's life flashing before one's eyes at near death, death in life, life in death, the alpha and the omega, right? So it's all sorts of threads there, but one of the great, I mean, it's a very funny play. It's a lot of his plays are poignant, and so funny and deep, and there are just these wonderful moments when he is sure what he's going to hear next on the tape. And it completely throws him out of his chair. Not what he was expecting at all. And there's this place where he's
Right.
talking about some moment that is seared in his memory and he'll never forget it. And the guy in the play right now is going, he has forgotten it. So having now come up with a tagline for this, I'm going to re-index and hope it gets more friends.
Was it Beckett?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Whew.
Memory
Yeah.
technique.
Took me a minute. Well, it's funny. I saw the cat, and I had an administrator years ago, and her cat was named Beckett after a sociologist. And I saw the cat, and I thought Beckett, and I was like, oh, that was it.
Oh, thank you, world.
Right. Well, I have to punt. I have to punt because I don't have those early cards from Scott. And I searched for something that might be the next closest thing, but I couldn't find anything. So I got a punt.
Okay. All right.
But I found Beckett.
Yes.
That's a good thing. Well, I had this card filed exactly where Scott said to 4212/1. And it sat there. It sat there for, when did I write this? April of 22. So it sat there for 2.5 years and with no companions at all. Because it was only, well, it wasn't even indexed. The category that it was in was indexed, but the card itself wasn't indexed. And it wasn't until a couple of days ago, actually, when something that I was reading about Ramon Lowell made me go, huh, that reminds me of that quote from Lumen. And I looked it up, and then it all exploded. Um,
Cool.
so now, at this point, it does have one friend, actually a couple friends. I've written a couple of cards after it. But everything, it got a tagline, and I'm going to share my tagline for this Lumen quote because I chose a different thing to focus on than Julianne did. As you know, as you said, there's so many concepts in this one quote. It's easy to come up with a lot of different ones. But what I chose was information originates in systems of comparative schema. Because that was the connection that I had made with it, and so that's what I'm indexing it under. And now that I've got information and systems and comparative and schema all in my index, I'm sure that it will find some more friends pretty soon. So, yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you, Mel. This has been such a rich episode. I'm blown away. I've got a to-do list a half a mile long just of copying the great ideas I've gotten from all of you.
Yeah, same.
I love leaving with homework.
Yes, we know that about you.
And we talk about a whole wide range of interests. We've got our Roanoke project going on. You can check it out there. So come on over to Lily Pub, and we have also a circle for Zettelkasten where we can talk about all things about how we design and work with our Zettelkastens. So there's a lot to enjoy. And don't forget fiction writing, where you can follow Victoria as she creates her book Zettelkasten for Fiction Writers and leads the Fusion Writing Group. So there's much to see over there. Mel's newsletter group also meets on Lily Pub. So you'll have a one-stop shopping experience for great Zettelkasten content in the Lily Pub.
Thank you, Kathleen.
I can vouch for that. It's the best social media group I've been in by leaps and bounds.
Well, we'll see everybody next week then.
Yeah. Awesome.
Well, goodbye, everybody.